Rob, are you? I don't hear him. No? Okay. Trustee Myers?
Present. Yes.
Present. Trustee McLaughlin?
Present.
Present. I have 6 present and 1 absent.
We do have a roll. We do have a quorum. Okay, flag salute. Are you up to it, Carrie?
Sure. Oh, I've been taken care of.
Good. Okay. Worried about you.
Okay. It's all good. Please follow me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Then adoption of the agenda. I will entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
Okay, are we ready for roll?
I make a motion to adopt the agenda.
And moved by Deborah. Is there a second?
I second. This is Carrie.
Okay, Carrie, second. Roll call.
Roll call. Trustee McLaughlin?
Oh,
Oh, she muted.
yeah.
Aye.
Aye. Trustee Sue Brazil?
Aye.
Trustee George?
Aye.
Trustee Waddy?
Aye.
Trustee Myers?
E.
E. Aye. Trustee Lara Colgrove?
Yes.
Aye. Okay, 1, 2. I have 6 and Trustee Wild is not present.
Okay, the agenda is approved. Is there any public comments on our agenda item?
I received no public comments.
Okay, so and our only agenda item tonight is a presentation by Mindy Fattig, Humboldt Bell North Southwood Director. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you, trustees and board and members here. It's an honor to be with you. I wish it was in person, but we'll take virtually. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, so I don't know if folks, if you can mute yourself, that might help on my end just a little bit. Before I start and I'll launch a PowerPoint, which I have access to the PowerPoint as well, I do want to just express my gratitude. I don't know if you guys know, some of you do, I started my teaching in Clamor Trinity in 25 years ago. So I was pulled right out of my credential program to take an internship job at Hoopa Elementary, and I cherish those years. I spent 3 years there and some of the best of my career. So I always have a soft spot for Clamor Trinity, and most of you know my husband and his siblings graduated from Hoopa High, so we always consider this district home to us. So it's a pleasure both personally and professionally to be able to present to you tonight. And I encourage, if you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and stop me and ask questions, or you can put them in the chat. I'll try and monitor that as well. So I was asked today to present on an overview of special education in talking with Jen and Craig, your special ed director. I'm kind of tailoring it to an overview of your programs and where you guys are at as far as compliance and outcomes for students with disabilities. I'm also going to be reviewing your budget for special education, so you can have an overview of how the money comes into the SELPA, how it's sent out to our member districts, and in particularly what Clamor Trinity Joint Unified School District gets from the SELPA for special education dollars. Okay, and again, please feel free to stop me or ask any questions along the way. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Before I do that, let me move this over. Over here. All right. Hopefully everyone can, Laura Lee, do you give a thumbs up if you saw that title slide okay? Yeah, perfect. Okay, I see you in my little top screen, so that's why I called on you. So this is again just an overview, some of the agenda items we're going to be talking about. First, I'm going to give you just a list of acronyms because I don't know about you guys, you as board members, you have a lot of acronyms you deal with too, and I just naturally talk in acronyms, and so I wanted you to be able to reference anything that I say. And if I do speak in acronyms, please feel free to stop me, and I'll be happy to address it. Sometimes it just seems like a second language when you're in special education. We're going to be talking about the services that Humboldt Del Norte SELPA provides, as well as Humboldt County Office of Ed. We are two separate entities, and so it can be confusing of what services you access through what agency. We're going to be talking about the funding allocation, as I talked about, and in particular to your district. I did some slides on SELPA funding and students with disability is SWD data. We're going to be talking about, see, I already did like 3 acronyms already. Maintenance of effort, least restrictive environment, your dashboard data, and some potential changes that are coming up through the legislation potentially for next school year or the following year. Some compliance monitoring, including your special education plan, and some next step suggestions of you have from you as the board members or any support that I can provide your district. So we're going to jump right into it. I know your time is precious here. So our special ed acronyms, again, SELPA stands for Special Education Local Plan Area. There's 140 SELPAs in California. SELPA is very unique just to California because we're so big. So every district belongs to a SELPA in California. We have 35 school districts and 2 county office of eds in our Humboldt Del Norte SELPA. And my responsibility is to oversee special ed services in all of those districts in the 2 counties. We are one of the largest geographically spread out SELPAs, with many of those districts being small and rural, as you guys are well aware of. We're talking about ERICS. ERICS is Education Related Intensive Counseling Service. That's the mental health service that's provided for students with IEPs who receive special ed services. Least restrictive environment is LRE. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Specific learning disability and OHI are 2 of the 13 federal eligibility categories under federal law for special education. And you'll see I pointed those 2 out because you have high rates of eligibility in Climate Trinity of specific learning disability and other health impairment. We'll be talking about that in a future slide. For your reference, IEP and IFSP, those are individualized plans for students who are eligible under one of the 13 federal categories. The difference is the IFSP is for 0 to 3 years old. You're going to excuse me, I have a puppy. So those of you I noticed, I think, Trustee Colgrove, I think you're like, if I hear dogs in the background, I'm like, oh, thank goodness, because my husband and I have a little pug puppy here, and he doesn't seem to behave himself when I'm presenting recently. Maintenance of effort, we're going to be talking about, that's part of the fiscal service. And then of course, SACE is our special education information system. That's where all of our IEPs are written, all of our data is kept, but it is not the legal copy of the IEP. It is only an information system. The legal copies are actually in the files signed by families and IEP members. Okay. So with that, Humboldt Del Norte SELPA, the services that we provide to all of our districts, I'm using LEAs as local educational agency just to have a synonym for districts. We provide through my office, and I oversee all the mental health clinicians. So all the students who need social emotional, have the most intense social emotional needs that also receive special ed services, they receive ERICS. And in addition, this year, my office will provide group counseling to any student that needs it, whether they have an IEP, whether they receive special ed or not. And so we're doing 6-week intensive group counseling, and that's open to any district that needs it, any student that needs it. You do not need to have an IEP, and that is free of charge to all the districts. And that's because we noticed during the pandemic of the need for social emotional and to get those support groups up and going to help our students transition back. My office also provides all the low incidence personnel. All the low incidence is staff that serves our deaf, hard of hearing, our visually impaired, our severe orthopedically impaired students, and students that require orientation mobility. So my office provides all the personnel and to the districts for any students that require that service. We also provide board certified behavioral analysts or behaviorists. And the reason why that is in a different color, as well as behavioral support assistance, is because that's a chargeback program. So if you need that service, you are charged back an hourly rate or a contract rate, but those are available for all students that need it. You do not need to have an IEP or be special ed to get a behaviorist. We're actually moving in the direction the last 4 years of trying to get behaviorists in the schools to help classrooms, to help classroom management, to help any students that require it and any teachers that can need support from a behaviorist. And so we've had a behaviorist contracted out to Klamath Trinity for at least the last couple years to help. And that's Jenny Streeter is assigned out to your area. We also do alternative dispute resolution. We do quite a bit for families and districts in your, or staff in your district in KT. And that's where a parent in the school district just aren't agreeing on their IEP. We come in and provide facilitated IEPs. We meet with the families, we meet with the staff, we try to come to some kind of agreement so it doesn't go to due process lawsuits, basically. We've been pretty successful in that area, especially up in KT. We're also, just a note, up in your area, we are working with the ACLU on some of the cases as they are brought in as advocates for some of your students. And so we partner with them as well as disability rights. So we all come together to try and figure out a solution that is legally sound for the student and without involving attorneys. And so we've been very successful in Klamath Trinity doing that as well. And of course, we provide general program support, individual questions, as well as multi-tiered system of support, universal design for learning and inclusion. Right now, I'm working with 6 districts on their inclusion efforts. And so I'm working with the superintendent and a group of staff at each of those districts, and they're in various places of inclusion efforts. And I'm just brought in as a consultant, and I'm totally free. And I look at your data and I work with your staff and see what the challenges are. And I bring in outside presenters, normally totally free. And we're looking at redesigning some special education programs. So again, that's just based on requests from the districts, if they would like my support in that, and see where they want to go on next steps. The other part that we do in the SELPA is compliance monitoring and support. This is a task that we're charged with from the California Department of Education. And you'll see some of that when we go over your special education plan as well. And of course, professional development. Most of our professional development is free of charge to the districts. And we provide a wide range of professional development to IEP compliance, how to write IEPs, to program design, to inclusion, differentiation of instruction. I provide training to general education teachers on their rights and responsibilities on serving students with disabilities. We provide trauma-informed care practices. We also provide training free of charge to the community and to parents. So we have a wide range of topics that we can present on, and some of them are also archived and recorded and available on our SELPA website for anyone to access as well at their leisure. I'm not monitoring the chat, so if you guys have questions, just unmute yourself. That would be helpful because I have 2 screens going. HCOE services provided. HCOE is different than SELPA. Even though HCOE is our employer, because we are not a school district as a SELPA, we have to be employed by a school district or a county office. HCOE is our administrative unit, but we are completely separate. We have separate buildings. I'm in charge of all the staff. We have separate policies and procedures. We coordinate as best as we can and ability to make sure it's seamless for districts. But HCOE provides certain services and SELPA provides certain services. HCOE provides school psychologists, speech and language pathologists, occupational therapists, nurses for initial and triennial, as well as they operate the Glenn Paul Center, and they do special beginnings itinerant preschool services. That's all done through Humboldt County Office of Ed, which Katie is the special ed director and Genevieve is the program director for the preschool. So if you had any questions about contracts or anything regarding these services, you would reach out to Humboldt County Office of Ed. If you had any questions about low incidence and mental health supports or trainings, you would reach out to me in the SELPA office. So I hope that can differentiate the difference between that. Are there any questions before I go on to the next section? Okay, if you guys are okay, just me plowing on, I'm good. Okay. All right, just checking in. Okay, so what I do want to frame this conversation, because we're going to go into the program aspect and your data and your students and what does it show regarding your students. And we're also going to go into the fiscal aspect. But when I start this presentation, I want to make sure that we frame students who receive special ed services and who we're talking about, right? And where do we want our kids to go? So the biggest thing, what I'm noticing, you know, again, 25 years, this is my 10th year as SELPA director. I was 3 years as Del Norte County special ed director and Humboldt County Office of Education sped director. And I also teach at Humboldt State. I teach in the graduate special ed teacher credential programs, and I teach their special ed law class. So in all of that years of experience, and again, starting out in KT, that's what gave me my foundation. It belongs, basically, if you're going to do any system change, especially for students with disabilities, and improve their outcomes, it all revolves around the culture in your district. Now, culture meaning your mindset about how do you think and act, and how do other students and how do other staff think and act about students who receive special ed services. We have to remember that they're all general education students first, right? They're all included in your LCAP. All students are our students. Sometimes we still get in the mindset like, oh, those special education kids go to that classroom, or that's, you know, talk to the resource teacher or the special day class teacher. That's, you know, send that kid to that. We have to really be consciously thinking, and it's no fault of anybody, but all students are our students. Every single teacher, every single board member, every single employee, these are all of our students. And some may receive services for special ed, some may receive services for language learners, but they're all of our students. And I think all of us collectively have an obligation to serve all of our students. Most of the students with disabilities in your area are included in your LCAP under some kind of supplementary concentration grants. And that's emphasizing that they're general education students first that generate those dollars as well. I would highly encourage the board, and I'll be happy to present a template if you like to Jen, to use people first language. What this means is, and it's just a little tiny tweak in your culture, but instead of saying, I have an autistic child, say, I have a child with autism. So the disability isn't defining the student or the child. It's just one part of that student or child. Personally, many of you know, I've known for over 25 years, and I know you know my in-laws. I have a son that has cerebral palsy. He's 20 years old now. He's doing great. He's in college in Utah. But I don't say my cerebral palsy son. I say I have a son who happens to have cerebral palsy. So I really encourage you in all of your written publications and in your communications that you really use people first language and not defining the person or the child by their disability first and foremost. And again, if your board wants to take on a resolution to adopt people first language, I'll be happy to supply a template for you to do that. SELPA took the people first language proclamation and resolution about 7 years ago to our board. So if that's something you want more information on, I'll be happy to do that. The biggest thing we have to remember is that special ed is a service. It's not a place. There's nowhere in federal or state or even SELPA procedural manuals that say special ed is a place. You go to the special day classroom, you go to the resource room. It's not a place, it's a service. There is nothing in our IEPs unless our staff writes it in that says special day class, that says resource room. That has been out of language now for probably 7 to 8 years. All of our students that receive special ed services, most of them receive specialized academic instruction. And how much they need of that next determines where that service is going to take place. But we have to remember that it's not a place that gets, kid gets tracked into. It's a service based on what the student's needs are. Now that very well may be a separate classroom. It may very well be going to a different classroom a couple hours a day. But I think we just need to make sure we have our mindset that it's a service. Least restrictive environment. This is, I don't know about if you board members have gotten wind of this or not, but it's a hot topic in the state. I am also the chair of the California State SELPA Administrators. So I'm the chair this year for that organization statewide. And there's a potential bill going through that will add least restrictive environment percentages on the dashboard, the California dashboard. And it's going to be, I think, in hearing tomorrow for a read. But the concern is there's pushback on both sides of this bill. Least restrictive environment is how much time a student with disabilities spends in a general education environment. And so this bill, potentially, every district in California will have your percentage of students that are in the general education environment. And again, that's inclusion, but I want to be mindful that inclusion is not for every kid, and nor am I a proponent of full inclusion for everybody. I think individual IEPs is individual. It has to be determined for every single kid. My least restrictive environment for me may not be the same as my fellow peer next to me. It's all based on individual decisions. But it is our obligation under federal law to have the students in the general education environment, and the law says to the maximum extent appropriate. And that is to have integration with peers who are non-disabled. So percentage of time in general ed classroom. I do want to highlight something nationwide, statewide, and even locally that I've been researching the last 4 years. We don't count the COVID year, so 5 years if you count the COVID year. But the earlier our students are placed in a special day class, the younger they're placed in a special day class, their trajectory of graduating on time with their peers goes drastically down. And their expectations in academic progress decline. Now, I'm not saying that's a fault of our special day class teachers, because we have some amazing special day class teachers. But there's something about the research, especially nationwide, if you have students that are getting their instruction from core content teachers, and you have supports in the classroom for certain students who are able to, the expectations go up and the more supports are happening for the kid. So just be mindful of that as far as special day classes and making sure we evaluate the child's placements of where they're receiving their services on an annual basis through the annual IEP. It's not just this kid's in special day class, so when he goes to the high school, we're going to put him in special day class, or when he transitions to 6th grade, we're going to put him in special day class. But really mindful of how we can look at increasing opportunities in the general ed for that particular student. Again, the IEP placement, and really we want to make sure, some people think if a student is in general education, we need to put an instructional aid or a SKIA on them. Not necessarily. Again, it's an individual decision based on data and the student's needs. But we also want to make sure that we're not putting instructional aids on kids that create a dependence on an adult. When in actuality, we really want to create independence in our kids, and we want to use these supports in order to do that strategically and unintentionally creating a dependence on adults or aides in particular. Questions or comments on that before I go on to your data of your students? We're good? All right, Laura Lee, we're good?
Hey, Mindy, this is Jen. I do have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's maybe more rhetorical, but thinking about the continuum of services and receiving services in a special day class or receiving services through the resource program, is it? I mean, would you characterize it more? It's dependent on the intensity, or is it the actual amount of time that a student's receiving services, or is it back to being individualized?
I would say it's probably a combination of all of it, Jen. I know that's not a clear-cut answer.
That's okay.
But I think you have to look at the individual kid's needs, and those decisions can't be emotion-based, but they have to be data-based, right? So you have to have clear assessments, progress monitoring data that informs your decisions on what that kid's skills are and what the needs are. We have quite a few districts in our SELPA that are getting rid of the terms SDC and resource classrooms, and they're making them more learning centers, where potentially 2 special ed teachers will be in the same room and kids come in and out based on what their IEP says, and it's more fluid. They also can help kids with 504s or kids who aren't even identified that needs additional support. So really, I think the traditional model, like for those of us that have been teaching a while, normally you go by, if you need 50% more of your day in special ed, then you're in special day class. If you need less, then you're in resource. That's still some way of thinking, but it's definitely changing. And it really should be individualized, because again, you need to look at the service and not the placement first.
I have another question.
Absolutely, Jen.
So a learning center model like that, how, in terms of the percentage of being in a placement that is with non-disabled peers, it could be 100% of the time.
Sure.
If it's a really dynamic and like a universal design. So
yeah, universal design or co-teaching. My passion is co-teaching. I won a nationwide award when I was teaching at McKinleyville Middle School for co-teaching model, wrote a book on it. I consulted across the nation before I went into administration. Co-teaching is a model that many of our districts are moving towards, or at least stepping their foot in a little bit, because you just don't go full co-teaching, because there's a lot of transitions need to happen for the students and for the staff. But that was one example of how you can utilize your existing resources and change how you use them in order to better the outcomes for students.
thank you.
You're welcome. So we're going to go into your district's data now. So students with disabilities comparatively to students without disabilities, and you can kind of identify some trends for you. So this slide here is, this is your second interim data. So it was just from January. And this is your students with disabilities. As of that date, you had 182 students with disabilities, and your daily attendance for your district was 918. Now 918, again, that's just a snapshot. Your numbers may have gone up or down since this was done. It's just one snapshot in time. Numbers, as we know, go up and down all the time. So based on your second interim, you're at about 19.8% of students with disabilities. Statewide average is about 11%. Our SELPA was about 21%, and now we're down to 17% in the last 5 years. So you can see you're 19.8. So a little bit on the high end for identification, but definitely not out of the norm of our SELPA in our area. So I just wanted to pull a couple data points for you from these two graphs that I created. So you can see American Indians, you can see race is the first graph you see, and then the one on the right is your students' disabilities. So the one on the right is all of your students based on race. And the reason why I'm pulling out race is because we have to monitor disproportionality by race, which I'll talk about in your SEP plans. So of your students who are American Indian, 18% of them are identified as students with disabilities. Of your white students in your district, 23% are identified as students with disabilities. Multi-ethnic students, 50% of them are identified as students with disabilities. Granted, you only have 24 total in your whole district, but of those 24, half of them are receiving special ed services, okay? And then your Hispanic and Latino, 28% of your overall population of Hispanic Latino students are students with disabilities, okay? So again, that's just data pulled right from SACE and right from the data quest regarding your ADA totals and your percentages. And these are, I recommend you guys do snapshots and do a trend data and see if you have trends up or down. For me, this thing that stands out for me is I have over a quarter students identified as Hispanic and Latino that receive special ed services. I'm hovering on the white too. And the multi-ethnic, I would drill down on that multi-ethnic. Why do half of our students who are multi-ethnic end up in special ed? So I would drill down on those IEPs and say, are we coding them right as multi-ethnic? Making sure our data is right first before then we go to their program needs.
Mindy, what would multi-ethnic be? I know that.
That's a great question. Multi-ethnic is those families that identify as more than one race or ethnicity. So maybe they identify as American Indian and also Hispanic, or maybe they identify as Pacific Islander and American Indian, or they identified in two race or ethnicities. And some of it may be just a data entry error, right? And so it's really important to kind of look at those and see. To have 24 multi-ethnic in your area, I would probably want to look in the data to see if it's valid, right? And so that would be one of my first steps in just looking at this. Your American Indian, 18%, again, the statewide average is about 11% for students with disabilities. So you're high in these four categories for sure. So then I would just, kind of looking at our overall program as a whole. What are we doing for pre-referral interventions prior to an assessment for special ed? Are we over-identifying certain kids by race and ethnicity? And if we are, we're obviously not doing it on purpose. So what are we doing with our programs, or can we look at our programs in addressing those students' needs? For our Hispanic population, I don't know if you have any English language learners, but it tends to be, English language learners, especially when they're young, they end up more in speech than students who are not English language learners. So something to look at that. Yeah, but good question though, on the multi-ethnic, that comes up all the time for sure, but it's self-identified. So the families had to self-identify that. So going here, so again, you can see that. Now I'm going to talk about your disability areas. As I talked about, there's 13 federal categories to qualify for special education services. And to qualify for special ed, you have to have the intensity and severity in order to require that service. We also have 504s, which is not special education. It's a general education, but you have to have a disability in order to qualify for 504 as well. But you don't have the intensity or severity that you would to qualify for an IEP. So your student data, so I just did a couple comparison charts here. So, and I pulled out the ones that kind of resonated with me. So your disability areas, so specific learning disability, of your students with disabilities, 58% of them are identified as having a specific learning disability. Of all of your students' disabilities, 7% are identified as speech, 9% are identified with autism, and 15% with other health impairment. What stands out to me as a SELPA director is obviously your high percentage of specific learning disability with 58%. That's really, really high. And also really high is your other health impairment. It's really unusual to see other health impairment above 5 to 6% in districts. Other health impairment, just so you know, is kind of a catch-all, for lack of a better word, federal category. If the kids, basically what I think is happening, if the kids need help and they don't qualify in any of the other areas, your district may be qualifying them under other health impairment. There's no required medical documentation for other health impairment. That's a misconception on that. It can be a team qualification that they meet other health impairment. It could be for those kiddos that maybe don't qualify for the label emotionally disturbed due to social emotional issues, but we know they have some intense social emotional needs. So the district is choosing to qualify them under other health impairment. It might be those kiddos that have ADHD. ADHD or ADD does not qualify on any other 12 categories, but the team, IEP team, could elect to qualify them under other health impairment. Right now, you have 31 students that are classified under other health impairment. In your district, you have 118 that are classified as having a specific learning disability. So those numbers are pretty high. You have 18 students with autism. Autism is on the rise. It always has been. That number doesn't really concern me as much in looking at it. But you do have more students with autism than you have speech. So if I were to look at your data, I would say, are the students really autistic or do they have speech and language issues? Because it's hard to tell when they're little if it's not prevalent yet in the autism-like characteristics. But this is, again, just data taken right from the SACE system. This is current data that I just took last week. So again, if I'm looking at 58% of all of my students' disabilities have a specific learning disability, I would probably drill down into that a little bit and see what grades are the students being referred into. Those I know Carrie Waddy and I used to teach together, and I know, we had a lot of kids around 2nd and 3rd grade that ended up being referred, because that's when the content curriculum switches from really concrete to abstract concepts. And you tend to get a lot of referrals around 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade. So what I would do, my suggestion to the board and to the district, is to really drill down on what grades were they first identified as having a learning disability. And then what pre-referral interventions or what strategies are we putting in place under multi-tiered systems of support to help those grades or the grade before it? Because we can see if we can preventatively help these kids without needing the label of having a disability in order to get help.
Mindy?
Yeah, Laura.
I love your screen here. Are we going to be able to get copies of this later?
Absolutely. You'll have it by the end of today as soon as I'm off. I'll send it to Jen. And I sent her a preliminary copy, Jen. You have it. I just added one more slide since there, Jen. But she has all of the data slides. I just added a couple more slides this afternoon. But absolutely, I'll send the most current one out, and you guys will have it by tonight.
Okay, great. Thank you. I won't take as many notes.
Oh yeah, you don't need to write furiously. I'll send it all out to you. And I'll be happy to do a study session with the board again if you want me to drill down on some data with your district staff. I'll be happy to help in any way that you need. Or if you have questions that come up, I'll be happy to help work with Jen and her staff in order to address those for you.
Great, thank you.
So that's your data. So now you have an overall picture of who your kids are, what they're eligible for, and race and ethnicity of what we're identifying kids in, okay? So now we have the compliance hat that I have to do in SELPA. And Klamath Trinity was found out of compliance. They were found as targeted review and needs assistance by the California Department of Education for their special education programs. They were found they were out of compliance in the following indicators: dropout rate, performance for students' disabilities in ELA achievement and math achievement, They were also out in ELA and math participation rates for students with disabilities, as well as the suspension rates. So what that means, and I'm going to show you some more data on the next slide here, exactly how you were out and what your threshold for getting out or getting back into compliance is. But we have to remember, you know, your district, it could be 1 or 2 kids that can knock you out of compliance, or 1 or 2 kids that put you back into compliance because our numbers are so small. So I think we really need to look at the reasons behind our kids are not performing well on ELA and math. The participation rate, I'm not so concerned about that because obviously there's no hopefully we'll get a waiver from the federal government that we don't have to count participation rate next year. But the ones I would really focus on obviously is your dropout rate, your achievement rate, and your suspension rates. Those are really the targeted areas. And your district wrote a special education plan. My office as SELPA sits on that team, and we review it with you at least 4 to 6 times a year. The good thing about COVID is these SEP, we call them SEP plans, they're going to be 2-year plans. Normally we only have 1 year and you can't really implement anything because then you get new data. This is a great opportunity because we have these plans for 2 years. Your district created a SEP plan, identified root causes for each of these areas of why they think you're out in these areas. And most importantly, they created activities to do in order to help increase the compliance rate for these indicators for students with disabilities. And that was Craig that head up that team. So I'm going to show you your actual data in the next slide. And it's really, there's a lot of numbers. So yes, Laura Lee, definitely you'll get this because it's kind of hard to see on the screen. But I'm going to show you your numbers. So how did they determine and how close or how far apart are you on these indicators? So you can see indicator 2 is the dropout rate. You have to have less than 10.72% and you were at 12.5%. So you were out of compliance on that. So really on that, you know, your SEP plan should identify a root cause. What do they think is the cause for that? Could it have been data entry error? I don't know. That's what your district created in their SEP plan, and they created action steps on which to take to decrease the dropout rate for your students. The other area you can see yes on the selection on the far right-hand side, ELA participation in math. You have to have 95% of all your students with disabilities taking statewide assessment exams, and you had 86%. What it doesn't account for is if parents say, I don't want my kid to take it, you're going to fall below the 95 percentile. So I'm not totally concerned about the participation rate. I wouldn't spend a lot of energy on that. The participation rate, usually the action plan for that is during IEP meetings, explaining the reason behind the statewide assessments and encouraging them to take it as one form of data to help drive their IEP services. But if we go down to academic performance and ELA and math performance, and again, these are students with disabilities. If you are red or orange on the dashboard, you're automatically selected for this indicator. So for this indicator, you would have to look at your dashboard data and see how far, and again, it's a progress monitoring data. It's not like the old every child left behind. This dashboard is and special ed indicators are a progress. So if you're showing progress, you're going to be in compliance. It's when you're not showing progress or you're showing lack of extreme progress the other way that you're going to be found out of compliance. So if your district shows improvement on your achievement rates, you're going to be shown that you're going to do okay on your compliance indicators.
Hey, Mindy.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Jen. Hi, just before you moved on to LRE, is this in comparison, or is this taking into account in comparison to the overall student body, or is it independent of comparative data?
Yes and no. So it's comparatively based on race and ethnicity for disproportionality. For actually academic scores, it is comparatively to you and the state. So
For students,
yeah,
for all students.
For all students.
So if all students were in the orange,
you would still be in the orange.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the orange or red is an automatic. So it's not that students with disabilities are underperforming compared to the general population or compared to students that are without disabilities. It's just Correct. If you're in the orange, you're in the orange period.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Exactly. And our goals, what we typically work with districts on their action plan on this is, do students have access to core content curriculum? Right? We're talking about MTSS and getting them in the general ed environment so they get access to high quality core curriculum. Right? And I'm not saying that our special ed teachers are not fabulous, because I'm a special education teacher, but if you're in a special ed class and you're teaching all the subjects, it's a lot harder to teach than if you're able to be a content specialist and teach that, and differentiation of that content. So some of the indicators, and I know the board is going to have a chance to have your SEPs and look at the SEPs for your district and give feedback and questions on that. And I'll be happy to join you again if you have a study session on that. But look at the next step for the board, which I would encourage, is to look at what the root causes are that Craig and his team identified, and what are your action steps to showing improvement. We have 2 years to do this, which is nice. Your suspension is also orange. So if you're automatically a red or orange on the dashboard, you're going to be found out of compliance, and you need to do a root cause analysis, and you need to do an action plan for that. So your suspensions, I would drill down on that and see where you're at. Is it by a certain race or ethnicity? Is it certain grade levels? Do a data dive and see where are my biggest suspensions happening. And it's going to be really important, because now suspensions and expulsions are reported through CalPADS for all students, including restraints. And that's public information. So it's really important that we're working on keeping our kids in school, in the classroom, using restorative practices as much as possible, and not just sending them home. Because quite a few of our kids, honestly, they'll do whatever they can just to get sent home, right? And they're still missing out on instruction. So we have to look at creating programs and incentivizing programs that really keep the kids in school, but also recognize that what you did is not okay, that behavior. But let's do a restorative justice circle, or let's do some other kind of instruction that's a learning opportunity rather than a punitive opportunity, a punitive consequence, especially for our students with disabilities who may already feel like they're failing because they have a disability. So that's your SEPs. And again, it's a 2-year SEP because we have no dashboard this year for the state. So they're giving us another year on our data, which is fantastic for me. Questions on that before I go on to the fiscal? Next is the fiscal discussion. You good on that? Am I doing okay on time for you guys? Okay. All right, so now we're heading to the fiscal. So we're taking off the program, we're putting on the fiscal hat. So I tried to make it as simplistic as we can, because we do have a very complicated self-allocation model, but hopefully ask me questions. So I just put this very simple chart together here. And this is how the money is disseminated through all of our LEAs and the 2 county office of ed. So the biggest part of the pie is what's called unduplicated count. That's your special education numbers. So you get $2,633 for every student that has an IEP. And that goes based on your count. And that's on an October count. So it's based on our October CalPADS Fall 1. And then we have students with disabilities who only receive speech. So the unduplicated count are those kids that receive specialized academic instruction, who would be in your resource programs or your special day class programs. And then we have the kids that only receive speech. You only have about 15 kids that only receive speech, but we have a separate rate for that. They get about $500 less, because the speech services aren't as expensive as the other services that are needed. So speech kids get $2,146 each for every speech kid you have based on your October count. And then if we keep going around the circle here, we have AB 602 augmentation. This is what we used to call our severe allocation. So this is a group at the SELPA, and you can apply for this funds. And so 20%, which is almost $3 million, is set aside to reimburse districts for these high cost services. So if you have students that have one-on-one aides that are on their IEPs, we can give you an augmentation. And the current augmentation right now is about $10,000. So KT and every district applies for this funds. They apply in October for the preliminary count. And then that's the funding. And then they apply again in April for the preliminary count for the next year. And that's based on the high cost students. So if your student has high cost, a lot of services, one-on-one aides, you can apply to get supplemental funds from the SELPA for that to help offset that cost. Then we have what's called off the top programs. We have 11% of our total allocation goes to off the top. This pays for stuff like low incident staff that I talked about, deaf and hard of hearing, visually impaired. It goes to pay for all the SELPA admin, all the SELPA admin supports, the fiscal supports, the data support, SACE support, all of that. Del Norte, because they're their own county, they don't access some of our services. So they have a separate allocation that we give to Del Norte because they don't access our behaviorists. They don't access some services like that. So they get their own allocation. And then 14% of our total allocation is sent out just based on your ADA. So some of it's by special ed count, some of it's by speech only count, some of it's by ADA. Okay. And then for Klamath Trinity in particular, this next slide will show you exactly as of second interim, which is as of January. This is your second interim numbers and how much funding you get from the SELPA. This is federal and state combined. I just want to make sure, and I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. So your 602 augmentation, you had 12.25 students. We don't have a quarter of a student. I know it sounds funny, but we prorate it based on if a student only had a SKIA for half a day, we wouldn't give you the full amount. We would give you half of it. So you get your 0.25s because there's half of aids somewhere or quarter of aids. So you qualified for 12.25. And again, these are high cost kids. So you had 130,000 additional supplemental money from the SELPA. Your speech funding, you can see 11 kids at the P2. Your unduplicated count was 171 students. And then your ADA is 117 and some change that we pay for ADA. And all of the rates are the same for every district as far as how much we pay. It's all set. So your total special ed allocation from the SELPA is $712,889. And again, this is a combination of federal and state revenue. So the federal allocation is a total of $207,850. And again, just for your budget people and you guys, it's restricted to the budget resource code of 3310. And it's based on an IDA grant, which is a federal grant. And we pay out 1,142 for unduplicated students' disabilities, regardless of their speech, whatever they have, that's the flat rate that we send out for the federal money. So you can see your federal allocation is a little over 200,000, your state allocation is a little over 500,000 for a total of 712 and 889. Okay, I don't know what my puppy's doing, sorry.
I have a question, Mindy.
Sure.
This is Martha. So when you talk about ADAs, is that ADA generated separate from the ADA the district generates for that child? So is that child counted once by the SELPA and once by the district?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. And that's because when we're doing our SELPA allocation formula, I thought it was really important to give an allocation for ADA because you want to do preventative services, right? You don't want to just get money when they already have an IEP. So you want to focus on multi-tiered system of support and your pre-referral interventions so that we hopefully don't have kids that absolutely need an IEP to get services. So that's why. But yes, you're double funded. It's separate funding. Good question, though.
Mindy?
Yeah, Lorley.
Yeah, so on the 3310, you said that was 207,850.
Correct.
On the 6,500 revenue, what was that, 505,039 or?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so that's the total money that the district gets for special ed.
The total between the federal and the state total revenue is 712,889.
And yet in our budget, we are spending $3,016,717.
Yeah, that's a big problem, huh?
Yep.
Yeah. So, and we're going to talk about maintenance of, and that's maintenance of effort. So it's really important to make sure that you're not coding everything to special ed too. If you have psychologists, those don't need to be coded to special ed 6,500 because they do assessments before the child's even eligible, which is not a special ed service. If you have behaviorists that are serving all kids, don't code them to special ed, code them to your general ed resources. The reason why you want to keep your special ed expenditures down is because this thing called maintenance of effort. right? Maintenance of effort is a federal law where you have to maintain the same level of spending year after year after year. So if your district is spending more and more in special ed, you're expected to keep spending more and more in special ed. Unless you have an exemption, meaning you have a high cost kid that left your district, or you go down in special ed numbers, or you have a teacher, a special ed teacher that is at the highest in the salary schedule and they retire and you replace them with a first year teacher. Those are the only exemptions you can take to lower your maintenance of effort on special ed.
So what is the consequence if you don't meet the maintenance of effort?
It's a dollar for dollar penalty. So if you don't meet it by $100,000, then you owe $100,000. So it's pretty significant. So Carol in my office works with the business, and we actually just sent out our second interim reports and letting districts know if they don't look like they're going to meet maintenance of effort. It looks like, Laura Lee, you guys are well above your maintenance of effort, right? I mean, it looks like your general fund contribution is pretty high based on what you get for revenue.
2,303,828. Yep.
Yeah, so you're not in danger of not meeting your MOE, but we do want to look at what exemptions you can still take. So maybe you can lower that maintenance of effort over time. So then we can look at shifting some of your expenditures into general education and lowering over time your maintenance of effort benchmarked level. And that's something that Carol Ingham in the SELP office, she's entirely SELP fiscal support now. So she just will work with districts on just this issue and sit down and work with them. And Carmi, I know, has been great, a great support and a great resource for us too in the SELPA.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can see you're only getting 712, right? And if you're coding over 2 million, double of what your revenue is. So we'll definitely want to take a look at that more in depth.
Mindy, this is Jen. Are you going to continue with maintenance of effort? I have another question.
No, go right ahead.
So I remember working with you. I did not have a specific exemption once upon a time, but there were certain conditions because of the student count. It was something about the ratio of the student count and who was receiving speech and speech only. And there were, I think what we did was we billed all of our initial assessments with our psychologist we coded it as special ed. This is before I was in this district. And then we went and made some adjustments. So, I mean, is there, if it's not one of the 3 exemptions, are there ways of explaining and saying, well, we made a previous miscode, so that should not, or are you kind of locked in? With
that might be hard because this is all a federal law. So we don't have a lot of wiggle room with the State Department. What we can do is look and see if every year, even if you meet MOE, still looking at taking exemptions, because you can lower your MOE, even if you still meet it, you can lower it over time.
Okay.
And the biggest thing for you guys is, you remember, you're at almost 20% identification rate for students with disabilities. That's a huge expenditure for your district in serving students. So you probably want to look at, I'm sure you guys have done amazing work too. You want to look at your multi-tier system of support. What are your pre-referral interventions? Just like we did with the suspension conversation. What supports are we putting in place for all students that eventually will definitely help our students who may not need a specific learning disability diagnosis or label in order to get help, especially since you have 58% of your students in special ed that are under a specific learning disability. Is it reading? Is it math? Is it auditory processing? How can we help give training and support and coaching to our teachers in order to address all students' needs in that area, so that a student doesn't fall so far behind that they need an IEP? So, and I know you constantly as board members look at this all the time. So this is just one snapshot of that. But it also, as Laura Lee definitely so eloquently put it, and in black and white, that if you look at doing your program through an MTSS model and pre-referral intervention, obviously your numbers and your assessment rates are going to go down, which equates to less expenditures. And the students may get supports earlier without an IEP. But it's a process and it's a change. It cannot happen overnight. And you really need to let your data and what your student needs are drive that discussion. And your staff needs. What is your staff needs, training wise? So that's a federal allocation. So before I close out, I know I'm right at almost my 6 o'clock. My little timer's almost to go off. So the SELPA resources, I just want to make sure that you guys are aware of. We do have a website. We are going to totally revamp that website in the next couple months, but we do have an hdnselpa.org website. On there, you're going to find a procedural manual that I wrote for special ed that has every single question you can probably think of. It has the federal law, the state law, and local procedures and recommended tips for every single area in special education. We also have the eligibility criteria manual that I wrote about 3 years ago. All of the 13 categories that I talked about has each their own page, and it tells you what assessments you need to use and what the eligibility criteria is. For your district, I would recommend really taking a look at the specific learning disability and the other health impairment, because those are your two areas that seem to be really high in percentages of eligibility in your district. Can you see my puppy on my screen now? He is really trying hard to get my attention. Oh, it's almost done, buddy. Hang on. So we also have professional development that are archived on our website. And we also offer free professional development. And they're offering it, are both listed on the SELPA website and HCOE. And at any time your district identifies, hey, Mindy, we need a training in trauma-informed responses, or we need a training for caregivers, or we want a training for parents on their rights during an IEP, or we want a training for general ed teachers on what their role is in an IEP. Whatever you identify, you can contact us, and I can probably guarantee you we will find someone to do it, and it'll be free of charge through the SELPA. And again, professional development as requested. I can't play with you right now, I'm sorry. And then we also have a community advisory committee. So community advisory committee is made up of stakeholders and members. It's made up of community members and educational partners that come together 4 times a year, and they advise me on issues that are happening out in our SELPA. And finally, we have SEAC. SEAC is Special Education Administrators Advisory Committee, and Craig is a SEAC member. And these are for, it's an advisory member board. Basically, we meet once a month. And we bring up any issues in special education out in the districts, and any things that are happening from the federal or state level, I give to the SEAC members to disseminate in their districts as well. So that's what we have going. So I think I'm right at 6. So I want to make sure I value your time and make sure that you also have an opportunity to ask any questions if you would like.
Want to thank you. I think you've raised a lot of questions, but I've got homework to do before I get to real ones. So
yeah, no problem. And like I said, I work with Craig and Jen and your staff. So if there's any other questions, or you'd like me to come back and explain anything in more detail or help you do a study, I'll be happy to do that in any way.
okay, thank you.
Of course. Did everyone learn at least one thing tonight? Okay, there. I shouldn't have called. Good.
I did. Thank you so much, Mindy.
Thanks, Carrie. Great to see you. Yeah.
Okay, Jen, are we, is Craig on, or?
Craig's on. Yeah, and this was our plan for the evening, just to have the presentation. If anybody has questions. So I would imagine, I predict that as soon as we leave the meeting, everybody's going to think of something that they wished that they had asked Mindy. Craig and I talk with her, as often as we need to. So I can definitely be the conduit for questions. And I think it's a lot to take in. And then when you had talked about doing some of the strategizing, I think that will be something to put on for the board to do after we do get to look at the data, kind of do the data dive. I did have one other question though, in terms of there's so much disaggregated data, but it seems like the one thing that you brought up was what is the age or the grade level at which students are referred, and that's something that we would have to kind of manually go in and go through IEPs. Is that correct?
Yeah, you could do it. You could do a search through SACE, and you can at least see, you can check on initial IEPs and by age or grade. Yeah.
By what? What was the last thing you said?
By age or grade.
Okay.
If you'd like, I can put that together for you this week.
That's great. That was an interest. I had never really thought of that. So, well, I learned a lot of things, but that was really That's a big deal. And that's, yeah, that is a data point that would be good to really look at, because we do start to, have the expectations of reading levels and things like that.
So I have a question. Yeah, go ahead with your question, Jen.
Do we have trend analyses that show these data over time, how they change? Are the, numbers sort of consistent from year to year? Are fewer kids requiring specialized services over time, or are they requiring increased services? I'm just wondering what the trend is like.
Absolutely. Thank you, trustee. I'll be more than happy as a CELPA director to put that together for you. I can pull together previous reports. Typically, we're going back to 4 years and we're taking the COVID year out of it to get a trend data. But I can say just without specifics, you're pretty much holding steady on your numbers over the years. As far as the intensity of services, that's something that I can pull down on and take a look for you and put together some information for you if you like, and I'll get that to Craig and Jen.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, one thing that I had a question, Jen or Craig, is where we were out of compliance and the special ed plan went in. Can you give us, and maybe it's Craig, what were the root causes? What were there, 4 out of compliance or 5? I can't remember. And what were the root causes? I'm curious on that.
So that is in the report. I can pull that out and provide that to you. The areas were suspensions, dropouts, and then state testing participation, as well as the state testing levels. So
yeah, I can chime in, Craig. I just happen to have it pulled up, so it might be easier for me to address that question. So in your dropout rate, which is indicator 2, your district identified lack of early identification of at-risk students as a potential root cause for your dropout rates. And that root cause was based on interviews with students who have dropped out in grades 8 to 12 and their disengagement. So maybe if we've identified or provided supports to them earlier, they wouldn't have felt the need to drop out. Your root cause, as I scroll down here on your participation rate, again, the root cause and the participation rate, that has a couple of different things to do, encouraging family and students to family to have their students take the test and students to show up and take the test, and being able to have a flexible window for those students if they were absent during testing, incentivize testing and taking testing. So that was a lot of subsequent makeup testing dates, maybe been the root cause, and maybe some more flexibility in the schedule. And that's the participation rate. And then I'm scrolling down real quick to see what you guys put as your root cause for your achievement. And so this one, it looks like, Craig, it looks like breaking up the testing segments, making sure they have accommodations and modifications explained and embedded. So there's more chance of success, encouragement of testing, and again, shorter testing windows for students with disabilities who may have attention problems, who just are clicking the boxes just. Also taking a look at making sure they have a safe and welcoming environment in which to take the test, and making sure that they show up and take the test as well, and have someone that they trust as an adult to be able to ask questions to. Also, one of the root causes, I don't see it in here, but I would also encourage those students to take those practice tests so they get familiar with the format of the test. And there's those practice tests throughout the year with the CASP that teachers can give, and teachers get the results, and then it will inform their teaching. So we're not just getting a test to check a box, but we're getting a test to use the data to inform our teaching practices for a particular standard. And students with disabilities may need more frequent practice tests so they get used to the format of it. But the root cause, it seems like students and staff, lack of attention given to certain students. I think you have in here, Craig. Students reporting not feeling safe at school or that they couldn't approach the staff for help. Seems to be one of the root causes that you guys wrote in your SEP. Another root cause is, again, it seems like the relationship seems to be reported from students that they didn't feel they had a relationship with someone to go and ask for help or ask for support. So your discipline, again, I'm just taking it right from your special education plan. Your root cause under your discipline is lack of positive instruction on expected behavioral norms and reinforcement of positive behavior with only consequential behavior, meaning out of school suspensions. So we talked about restorative justice practices. We talked about keeping kids at school, but still instructing them on the appropriate behaviors without letting it become norm, but letting them stay at school and find a way to learn through that process through the discipline instance rather than an out of school suspension. So, and I just briefly, I haven't read your SEP yet, so I just briefly glanced at it, Craig, but does that sound about right?
Yes.
So, Mindy,
Yeah, Carrie.
this is Carrie. I was really interested in the co-teaching that you were talking about, and if we could explore that some more and have some training on it. Craig, can you update me on what's going on with that?
At this time, we're beginning to work on a more of an inclusive classroom setting. That's something that superintendent and I have been discussing for the last few months. We have a couple of staff members that are being trained, and so that's something that's very in its early stages of happening. Hopefully, we'll be able to see that happen more completely in fall, but right now we're just trying to get a few of our teachers involved in that process.
Do we need to reach out to SELPA to help us with getting that moving? Maybe some more trainings?
Well, I would talk with the superintendent and find out how quickly we want to move this process along. We're trying to undertake the whole MTSS program right now, which is a big part of it, as well as conversations about universal learning design and inclusion. And so all those are part of it. But certainly, yeah, we could go ahead and have some training for the staff if we feel that that would help prepare the staff for that transition. I would welcome that.
I think what I would do, and Jen, you and I spoke too about this already, is I think, you know, if superintendent and Craig and I get together and we kind of lay out what are your priority focus areas and directions that you want to do. Obviously, we can throw all these acronyms at it, right? MTSS, UDL, inclusion, co-teaching, whatever, but we really need to be mindful about what are our priorities and what are our intended outcomes, and really take the time to map out a step-by-step plan to get there, because we have to make sure that the staff feels comfortable and on board and well-trained and coached and supported in order to make this happen, or our efforts aren't going to pay off, right? It's all about the teachers supporting our kids, all of our teachers, all of our kids. So when I normally take this on, Carrie, with districts, I'm working right now, I'm redesigning South Bay with the superintendent, Cuddyback, which is a very small school. I'm meeting with the superintendent, redesigning that. I'm doing McKinleyville Elementary School. I'm working with Eureka on a federal and state. We have an inclusion supporting practices grant that we've been doing for 3 years pretty successfully in preschool. And so I'm working with them as well, and starting to work with Southern Humboldt in their redesign of their special education program. So I think that's the approach I would hear. I would, you know, be in touch with your superintendent and prioritize really where their steps are. And then I look at doing a needs analysis with your staff to see where are they at in their knowledge level and comfort level and culture on the changes that may happen. And we take it step by step. It's not going to be an all for nothing. I'll tell you that, right? It's not everyone's included. Not everyone does co-teaching. We really, in my experience doing this over the last 20 or so years, it's really finding teachers and staff that are willing to, you know, step out a little bit and willing to try something new, but we outlined the amount of support that they're going to get along the way. So there's no questions they're going to get supported. And we build up model pockets of programs in your district until we can replicate that district-wide.
We're kind of priming for that right now. So that's exactly, Craig has talked with general education teachers who are receptive to having students who who are, I guess, categorized as being, in the special day class and having membership in the general education classroom, and then receiving services in the special day classroom as needed, and kind of, but really small steps, because we have to be able to support the students. We have to have the appropriate amount of, instructional aid supports or one-on-one supports and teachers, because it is, it could be a big leap for some teachers and a very, very big change. So we've gotten like just a drop, and we started that a couple months ago, having those conversations. We have 2 teachers that are doing universal design for learning training. We just got 2 classrooms. That's it. We just started with the smallest little step. So it is exactly that direction, Carrie. And I really, I like working with the SELPA a lot. I call over there. Heather is really accessible as well. So we have some really good opportunities to have, what did you say, model pockets?
Yeah, so what I mean by that is success will build success, right? And other teachers will build successful programs more than we will tell them to build programs, because it's coming from them. And so the models that I build, including the McKinleyville Middle School one, I started with 1 teacher and 1 special ed teacher, me. And we took a group of kids where we saw we had a lot of 7th graders. So we did 7th grade ELA, and we co-taught only in 7th grade ELA. And we had planning time, and we talked about it. We talked to staff members about it. And then pretty soon, after 1 or 2, 3 years, there are a lot of general education teachers, and we had a lot of requests for kids to go in our classrooms. And so it just built upon the success of the program. And so I know you're in the foundation of working on that. I mean, I don't know if the boards had a UDL overview. That would be great. If the board can have a universal design for learning overview. I'm finding the school boards that I work with, I think that's really helpful to understand. What are we talking about when we talk about universal design for learning? What does that mean? What does that mean to our teachers? What does that mean to our parents? What does that mean to our students? And so that's something that I would suggest. So the board is well informed and can help guide those decisions as well. And I'll be happy to help, as you know, Jen, I'll be happy to help in any way. As I started this whole presentation, and I'll tell any other district, Klamath Trinity has my heart. They always will. I mean, that they set my foundation of my entire educational plan. And I'm so grateful for my time I was able to spend in Klamath Trinity. And if I can give back in any way, I'll be more than happy to do so.
Great. Thank you.
I've got one other question, and that's on the testing days where the students didn't feel welcome or encouraged. The environment, I was curious on that one. Now, are we, I don't know, maybe Craig or Jen, is our trauma-informed care practices, is that being emphasized at all, or does that play into it?
I guess I'll go ahead and offer an answer for you. I think that all of our teachers are at different levels of comfort when it comes to practicing a trauma-informed care. Some incorporate it much more effectively and efficiently than others. Some of it is the challenges that the specific student faces, and in order to find a place where they can actually focus and sit down and not be distracted, sometimes it's very difficult for them. If a teacher, in some situations, if a teacher says, we need to sit down and focus, they might take that direct correction the wrong way and say, oh, my teacher hates me and I don't want to go back. And then it does take a period of time to kind of get them eased back into coming to school. So those are some of the broad challenges that our teachers face. And when those come up, we try and respond as quickly as we can. But especially in SDC settings, the students can have a lot of challenges when they try and re-enter a classroom or feel comfortable coming for the whole day or for a portion of it. So that's kind of what presents the largest challenge in making sure that we meet those assessment guidelines.
I have
Okay,
a
thank
question.
you. KTJUSD.
Well, my concern is that they're feeling this way and they're having these issues on test day. How are our teachers interacting with with these students throughout the year? Are they coming into an environment daily where they're feeling this way, or is this just because there's a little added stress? And if that's the case, why is it that our teachers are not prepared for that? And why are our programs not supporting them in that effort?
So in some circumstances, it is just the added stress of the testing schedule that is a little bit hard for students. Some of the students have the situation that occurs throughout the year where we'll get a specific student to come to school for a week or two, and then they just don't want to come anymore. And they'll spend 2.5 weeks not coming. And then we have to kind of ease them back, and parents work with us to get their students back on course. But as far as there are some teachers where we're constantly working with them to help create a welcoming, inclusive environment where it's very positive learning. So I think each of those scenarios has a different teacher can come to my mind on how they've addressed it and how they work through those challenges. Does that kind of answer your question?
Well, it does, but I'm not satisfied with the answer.
Okay. Well, press me harder then.
Okay. What is it that you're doing to ensure that our teachers are interacting productively with these students?
So what am I doing? So
Yeah.
I try to periodically do classroom visits to the special ed classrooms to see how well the teacher interacts and relates. I do periodic check-ins with parents. Sometimes I learn about challenging circumstances from the parent who says, my child hasn't been to school for a couple of weeks, and what can we do? And that's where it kind of comes to our attention. Like, well, why is your child not been there in 2 or 3 weeks? Well, because the teacher scolded them, or the teacher just spoke in too harsh a tone. And so for some of the more severe students, tone can kind of go a long way, or a change in schedule. So there are things. Can we do something more comprehensive, like a teacher training? I am constantly encouraging our staff to identify the courses, professional development courses that would help them, and to take advantage of those. I do also recognize at the end of the year that very few of our teachers actually take advantage of the professional development that's offered to them. So we need to find some way to encourage them to pursue their own professional development, identify areas of strengths and weaknesses, and then to follow through. That is something that I discuss with them during evaluations. And so some of them are more responsive than others.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, this is Carrie.
Here.
I appreciate your question, KTJUSD. I think it's really important for our students to bond with their teacher and their classmates at the beginning of the year, and to have bonding sessions and times when the class gets together for a class meeting at least once a week, just to discuss what's, if they have anything they want to share or anything they want help with, and use the classroom as a family to help them through things. I think that needs to be developed in some way in all the classes, because, some students have the support at home, that they don't need all of that. But many of our students do not have as much support as they need at home. And for our classrooms to help them feel as a family, I think that that kind of a training would be helpful for all of our teachers to understand.
Agreed.
I agree.
Yeah, I have a comment too. Well, I liked what Mindy said about the way of thinking that even the SDC students, they're that second. First, they're general education students. And I'm not sure that our teaching staff fully grasps that yes, this is my student, but my student needs extra help, and so they're going to be this person's student too. I'm not sure if our teachers fully understand that these are their students too. And, I'm not sure if we've gone to that.
If I could just clarify that just a little bit, I think you're absolutely right. But I think we need to identify general ed and special ed teachers, because I think that the greatest challenge is for some of our general ed teachers who very clearly see that student as a special ed student. And so we're hoping, the superintendent and I are hoping that through this process of developing in more inclusive classrooms, that the teachers will begin to see exactly what you're talking about, that the student is first a general ed student and they may need special ed support, but that's not an all day thing. And it's not where, when things get difficult, we say, oh, you need to go back to your special ed class, because that's where it is. One of the things I've asked the principals to do is to make sure that every student, every special ed student, is assigned to a general ed classroom where they can start their day. And sometimes that works a little bit more smoothly than others. I haven't checked to see if all of the special ed students this year were actually assigned. I know that that's been part of several conversations, so hopefully it has occurred. But I agree with you. That's amongst the general ed population. We really, really need to help those teachers understand that they're general ed first and they receive special ed services.
It's kind of a paradigm shift, it's kind of a different way of looking.
It really is, Martha. I'm glad you brought that up. And I do want to also just comment, like, if, for those of us who are whatever age we are, think about how much the perceptions of special education services have changed. So I really feel like we're in so much of a better place where there is a paradigm shift, and there are opportunities to not only change our thinking about it, but also provide supports to the classroom teachers and the teachers that are providing the special education services. I feel like it's a great opportunity, and the things that you all brought up are exactly as Craig said, like they are directing us toward a more inclusion. But it has to come, in small steps and with the supports. So I think that's exactly, and I do want to just comment. I mean, for me, like from when I was a child, even, it was like how the attitude has changed. And I think, we didn't hear, maybe Mindy, I don't know, but it seems like the people first language and talking about students and services it's like, we have to be deliberate about using that language, but it really, really matters. Those words really do matter, but I don't think it's an automatic thing for a lot of us to talk about students who receive services. But we try. We always, when Craig and I have conversations about special education, that we are really deliberate in the way that we do, even just when it's just the two of us talking about special education. We're really intentional because it is kind of a going upstream against things that we have been taught throughout our schooling. So I think it's great that we're having the conversation right now.
Yeah.
Sue.
I'm wondering if there are professional development opportunities that facilitate team building between the teachers who, you know, are sharing a classroom with special education people, so that they learn, you know, they learn how to co-teach in a way that blends the general education emphasis and yet the additional support that's needed by students with IEPs. It seems like this is a paradigm shift, and we're trying not to separate students out into a different learning environment, but to keep them in more of a inclusive environment, but have teachers been trained how to do that. It would require some finesse, you know, to have it, you know, to co-teach in a way that doesn't seem like you're singling out specific students for specific kinds of help, but it's more of a blended, not just for the students, but for the teachers, you know, more of an inclusive approach.
Yeah.
Do we train them together on how to, you
Yeah,
know,
we do
provide
definitely.
instruction
We do
together?
definitely, and you were right exactly, Trustee, on that. You know, it's important that it's not seen as, you know, I'm in here to help these kids, but I'm in here to help all kids. And through my years, through doing the co-teaching as a teacher, and then as a consultant across the nation doing it, for me, our discipline rates went down 68% for the sheer fact when we included students with disabilities in the general ed class with their peers, especially at the middle school level, where separation and labels and stuff can be so detrimental to kids and their self-esteem can be plummeting. So 68% for the same group of kids over 2 years, their discipline rates went down just by serving them in different environments. And their achievement rates were just incredible, off the charts, because especially in the middle school, because they're being held accountable by their peers too, right? And it's creating a classroom community, which I hear some of you guys talk about. It's a classroom community that we are all supporting each other. And I'm not a special ed kid. I just happen to be a kid who receives extra services, just like a kid who has a peanut allergy needs peanut allergy accommodations. It's nothing out of the norm. We need to demystify the fact that it's okay if I need social emotional counseling. It's okay if I need extra reading support. It's okay if I need accommodations for a peanut allergy. You know, and I think that's what you're getting to, Trustee, in the comments. And I appreciate that from your perspective, because that's exactly the environments that we're creating. Is you have two teachers. It doesn't matter if I'm a special ed teacher or not. Eventually, nobody knew if I was a special ed teacher or not. They just knew they had two teachers and they're there to help everybody. And
Right, and I'm thinking these same so-called special ed students, they're parts of families, you know. And when they're at home, when they're learning in a home environment or learning in a community environment, they aren't separated, you know. They're you know, they're learning from all kinds of people, you know, family members, community members, in all kinds of settings. So it seems to me really awkward for them to then be in school and feel like I'm different and I'm being treated differently. We need that environment to be more, you know, fluid and supportive for everybody, including these students, making sure they're getting the support they need, but not in a way that stigmatizes them, you know.
And I think it's a direct correlation with your dropout rates too. You know, your dropout rate, potentially that can be an impact. Now, your dropout rate that I explained was only for students with disabilities, but I'm sure you have a dropout rate that's general education as well. And so if we create this kind of culture in this community where we're all here together, we're all helping each other, we just may need different things at different times. Hopefully we can create that welcome environment where the kids get support the earliest they need it, with or without labels, and then hopefully they can achieve their graduation rate.
Good. Any other questions or comments? KTJUSD?
I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what you had said earlier about the trauma-informed care. Craig had mentioned that the teachers were not taking advantage of the professional development opportunities that they were being given. And I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can encourage that participation when we have the trauma-informed workshops. I don't know if there's a way to reward them for participation, but I think it's really important.
I think there are a number of teachers that do participate. I thought Craig was referencing another, or maybe he's saying at this time of year. I heard it a little bit different, Kadusha, about like at this time of year, it's really hard to now at this point, but I'm not sure. Craig, you're muted, but I didn't, I don't know that I think that there is an interest for sure. And there are
I was
people
on
that do
mute,
participate.
sorry.
Yeah, so
So
I just heard it a little bit differently.
So at this time of year, there are professional development is kind of winding down, but there continues to be a trauma-informed meeting once a month here at the high school that they have conversations about how to implement strategies and to what kind of resources they can access. So that's something that Erica Chase is a big part of. And if we need to get that information out more to all the teachers or incentivize their participation, then I guess that's something that we can discuss.
I mean, speaking from my behalf, whenever I presented to your staff, it was very overwhelmingly welcome and attended. So, and I just from an outside perspective, I've never had a problem with teachers attending or wanting information. So I think it's just a matter of providing those opportunities, which Craig and the superintendent are doing. So.
Yeah, Kadusha, I think you did mention at our last meeting that there were trauma-informed practices, trainings going on.
Yeah.
Has that schedule of when they are and how to participate? Did you get that?
I think I have that.
Yeah, I sent the information to Jen.
Okay.
Yeah, I already got it and signed up. I don't remember who I got it from.
It was from Erica's program, but the contact was Amy Colgrove.
Oh,
And I forwarded that to Jen so she could get the information out. But yeah, I've signed up for mine too.
okay.
I didn't get it.
I didn't get that.
Yeah, I didn't either.
I have it to get to you.
Okay. Okay, any other comments, questions? I think this has been very enlightening, at least for me, and to see where we need to delve into our numbers more. And I think, Mindy, you said you would help us with that.
Absolutely. So I'll definitely, my to-do list is following up, as I already sent the revised PowerPoint to Jen. So she has that and can send that out to the trustee members. And I'll also commit to doing a 4-year trend data analysis as requested by your board on identification rates, both by race, ethnicity, and disability. So I can commit to get that to you and probably within a week.
Okay, thank you. And that would be good information. I don't know, Jen, you and Craig will have to let us know. Is that reports that are meeting from special ed, or do we need to have more in-depth another workshop like this? Or so I'll leave it to you two to figure out how to get us up to speed here as a board. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Just again, appreciate the time and the opportunity to come and present to you. And if we can be a resource in any way, my email is on the PowerPoint, and please feel to reach out to me at any time and I'll be happy to help.
Thank you, Mindy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Thank
I
you.
think this winds down our study session for tonight. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Okay. I'll second that.
Debbie moves, Martha seconds to adjourn. Any discussion? Okay, roll call. Is Dana, are you muted?
There, okay, here we go. Sorry. Okay, motion has been called. So trustee McLaughlin,
Aye.
trustee Myers,
Aye.
trustee Colgrove. Aye. Trustee Waddy,
Aye.
trustee George,
Aye.
trustee Purcell.
Aye.
Okay.
We are adjourned.
Wild is-
Oh.